This is a roundtable which really brings together aspects of the technological fight against climate change and the social impact of the decisions we make in that arena. And I'm delighted that we're joined to chair this session by Jonathan Adams, who is one of our fellows and a renowned architect. He studied at Cardiff University's School of Architecture, subsequently worked at Percy Thomas Architects, and now has his own Jonathan Adams and Partners practice. And those of you in Cardiff will be aware, I'm sure, of some of the buildings that he's most famously worked on, the WJC building, the Sherman Theatre, and perhaps most famously of all, the Wales Millennium Centre. So delighted to have you with us, Jonathan, and looking forward to a really good discussion with between you and the rest of our researchers. So I will hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Martin. I welcome everybody to this roundtable discussion on the subject, will technologies designed to decarbonise homes exacerbate or reduce social inequalities? I'd just like to start with a bit of my own experience. In 2006, I took part in the committee of inquiry that was arranged by the charity Shelter Cymru, looking at the causes and conditions of poor housing across Wales. The work we did involved visiting communities in economic hardship all across the country and hearing firsthand from tenants and from homeowners about the impact that the state of their housing was having on every aspect of their lives. Before then, I had gone along with the popular perception that our ex-industrial communities and deep rural communities lived lives of stoical optimism, social cohesion and cultural pride. The reality that I experienced with Shelter Cymru was very different, though, and it was summed up in the title of the Commission's report, An Unnatural Disaster. Given the very large proportion of Welsh society that lives on below average income or that relies on benefit support, one of the things we found out is that we have a surprisingly high rate of owner occupancy. Around 80% of homes are privately owned in Wales. The increase in owner occupancy began in the 1980s, and it was an unexpected consequence of the suppression of trade unionism and the closure of collieries. Many of the workers that were laid off used their redundancy pay to buy the homes that they had previously rented, a right given to them by the same government that had taken away their livelihood. These curious legacy issues have brought us to where we are today, faced with what seems an uniquely difficult challenge. We have a population with limited economic leverage, living, for the most part, in old and often dilapidated homes that were designed to be fueled by coal. So is it really possible to change this picture over the course of the next few decades to one in which all of our people live in sound, healthy conditions and fueled entirely by renewable energy sources? So that's the discussion that we're going to have now. In the first half of the session, the panelists are going to talk on three subjects. In the second half, we'll be inviting questions and comments from all of the attendees for what we hope will be a lively discussion. And the four panelists are Dr. Rachel Hale. Rachel is a research associate at the School of Psychology at Cardiff University. She's based in the university's Understanding Risk group, working on living well in low carbon homes, which is one of the themes of the Active Building Centre project. Her background is in sociology, and her work focuses on the health and well-being of residents in the 5 new case study active homes sites in South Wales. We have Dr. Deborah Morgan. She's a senior research officer at the Centre for Innovative Ageing at Swansea University. She's currently researching health, social and financial well-being outcomes for older adults living in retrofitted or new build low carbon homes. Her background's in health and social care research. She specialises in loneliness and social isolation in later life. We have Dr. Inequality. She's a postdoctoral research associate at the Department of Architecture and Civil Engineering at the University of Bath. And she's also a registered architect, specialising in sustainable building design. And our fourth panellist is Dr. Kate O'Sullivan, a research associate for for the Flexus Consortium at Cardiff University and participant in the university's Understanding Risk group. Kate's conducting research into the interplay between homes, energy and people, looking at the energy performance of low carbon homes in real life and at the ways in which low carbon design has an influence on the daily lives of occupants. Dr. Ellie Nicolaidou is going to talk now on the first of the three subjects, which is the fundamental question: what is a low carbon building? So it's over to you, Dr. Nicolaidou, to start us off.
Okay, so along with my colleagues, we put together a few questions around the current situation and the future of the built environment. So the first of these questions is, what is a low carbon or active building? I'm going to explain in a bit what active means. But before answering this question, let's take a step back. So there is now the legal requirement in the UK, as we know, to reach net zero carbon by 2050. So the question is then how setting such a target is going to affect buildings. Well, given that the building sector is one of, let's say, the largest contributors to energy consumption and greenhouse emissions, of course, such a target is going to change the way we design, construct, operate, maintain and dispose buildings. So it is going to affect the whole life cycle of buildings. So there is then another question. So our existing approaches or existing definitions, regulations, standards, are they moving, are they heading in the right direction? Well, there are many reports out there, like the Climate Emergency Guide produced by LETI, which they state that the current building regulations are lagging behind the trajectory needed to achieve decarbonization. And in a similar way, there are reports that they say that even voluntary building standards do not, let's say, push the decarbonization agenda far enough, because they do not offer incentives for well-performing buildings, or sometimes they don't encourage holistic solutions. So there is definitely space for improvement. And we actually believe that there is a missed opportunity. And this opportunity is related to the synergetic relationship between buildings and the grid. So the Active Building Center Research Program aims to harness this opportunity by exploring the concept of active buildings. So now I'm going to explain what active means. So active buildings are buildings that produce, store and share energy based on the needs of their occupants, but also based on the needs of the grid, of the energy infrastructure. So by having such an active interaction with the grid, active buildings can help both the building and energy sectors reach net zero. And at the same time, such a synergetic relationship can reduce peak demands and therefore the need to invest in energy infrastructure, which can be very expensive. And it can also transform the occupants of buildings into prosumers, as they are called. So that means producers and consumers of renewable energy, and therefore reduce their energy bills. And at the same time, since we've been discussing about social inequality, hopefully everyone will feel that they contribute to this decarbonization vision. So everyone will be able to participate in such a vision. So as you can see in these diagrams, active buildings can provide the grid with a range of flexibility services. I will not go into detail, as this may be a bit out of topic, but you can we can discuss about this later, or you can have a look at our paper if you're interested in it. So here in Bath, we produced our own building standard, which is called Active Building Code. So this provides a definition of active buildings and also a framework for assessing their performance during the design process, but also once the building is constructed, so during the in-use stage. Now, to make sure that what we produce is fit for purpose, I ran 12 focus group discussions with a total number of 30 industry experts. So these were architects, engineers, sustainability consultants, developers, energy managers, so a range of stakeholders in order to capture different perspectives. So these stakeholders gave their own definition of active, and here you can see the most popular answers. So it is interesting that all of them interpreted activeness as responsiveness. Some of them, they talked about responsiveness to, let's say, the requirements of the grid, as I said earlier. Some of them, they talked about responsiveness to internal and external conditions, for example, the weather. So they consider that this is important, given that we've been talking about climate change. And some of them, they prioritize the responsiveness to the occupants. So we're going to discuss this later, and hopefully, well, it would be nice to hear your definition of a low carbon or active building. So now we'll hand over to Kate, my colleague Kate, who will talk about real life case studies. Kate?
Hi, yeah, thanks, Ellie, that's brilliant. Yeah, so just really to build on what Ellie has said, we thought it would be a good idea to highlight some examples of active buildings that are being developed as homes right now in Wales. So Rachel and I, along with our colleague Fiona Shivani, who isn't here today, we are researching both the experiences of residents moving into these new build active homes and the perspectives of many of the stakeholders that are involved in realising the developments. And as Jonathan said, this strand of the active building research is called Living Well in Low Carbon Homes. So for this strand, we've selected 5 case sites across South Wales, which are the developments presented on the slide. Can you still see the slide actually, or can you just see me? Should
I share it again? I don't mind.
Oh, if you can share it quickly, if not, I'll share mine. Sorry.
Hope this time I will be. Okay. I'll do it again.
Sorry, I just started talking without checking what was on the screen.
Okay, now it should be working. Yep.
Oh yeah, that's brilliant. Thanks, Anne. Sorry, yeah, so basically the 5 case sites that we're focusing on are represented by each of the images on the screen. And each of these sites holds many of the technical aspects of an active building that Ellie's described. So things like being able to produce energy, having low resident energy demands to increased efficiencies of the building fabric and also of the energy system itself, and also being able to store energy and have the capacity to offer grid flexibility. Despite these many similarities, and as you can see from the images, how the developments have been interpreted and realised as low carbon or active is different between each site. And this is reflective of other ambitions that the developers may hold. So things like, while they may want to be low carbon, they may also want to focus on the health and well-being of their occupants, or they may be focusing on fuel poverty, that type of thing. It also reflects the different locations that they're based in, and then the mix of the different stakeholders that are involved in creating the design and developments overall. And these differences are likely to impact the lived experiences and the daily lives of the residents living in them in lots of different ways. So of these developments, 3 are currently completed and are being lived in by people and their families. And it's those experiences that Rachel and I are going to be drawing on when we're discussing the different outcomes today. So that's it from me and what an active building could be in real life.
Okay, who are you passing on to now, Kate? So
I think we're going to look at the next question. I think, is there another question?
Oh, I see. Okay. So this, yeah, the questions, there was 3 questions that we originally looking at. And so the second question, first of all, I should say thanks to you, Kate, and obviously to Ellie for kicking us off. So the first question is one that we're expecting all of you to contribute to, or 4 of the panelists to contribute to. And this is to do with the challenges that you have to overcome to encourage people to retrofit their home or to move to a new low carbon home? You know, what are the obstacles that need to be dealt with? So who's going to start us off with that? Is that you again, Kate?
No, I think Deborah's going to take
Deborah.
this one.
Yeah. Deborah, if you'd be kind enough to take over now. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So our work at Swansea, which I'm undertaking with my colleague, Dr. Carol Maddock, we're looking at retrofitted low carbon homes, and they're social housing. So, and we're working, as Kate has 5 case sites, we also have 5 case sites, 3 in North Wales, 2 in North Wales and 3 in South Wales. And we're working primarily with older adults to look at how they experience the low carbon buildings as their homes are being retrofitted. And there are a number of challenges, I think, from an older adult perspective, which are mostly around the practicalities of having your home retrofitted. So when we're talking to older adults who are going through that process at the moment, they've had concerns about the level of disruption to their homes. So I should say that the retrofitting is different in each site that we're working on. So some are just having external cladding and new windows and so forth, and others are having hybrid heating systems put in. So it's everything from, you know, cladding right the way through and everything in between. So depending on what they're having, on the nature of the retrofit, it's very disruptive work, as you can imagine, because it's from the roof down. And, you know, there's older people are talking about some of the challenges about, you know, having to empty their roof spaces and prepare their properties for the retrofitting process. Some of them are not perhaps in the greatest of health and might need some support with that. They talk about a fear or lack of understanding of some of the technologies that are being fitted. And that's not to say that older people can't use technology. It is more about, when we talk about technology, it's not necessarily being designed with older people in mind in terms of the ergonomics or the practicalities of day-to-day use. You know, if we're using thermostats, is the text on the thermostat, can you read it? Because, you know, sometimes it's very small. I mean, I know that's something I struggle with. And then there's concern about the data sharing. Who's going to have that data, and who sees the data that's being collected? Because as part of the Active Building project, some of the homes are being monitored in terms of their energy usage, which is being seen by the team or by the social landlord. And we're also working to inform the project. We are working with a group of older adults and also an expert advisory group who are informing the project from their perspectives. And there has been some suggestions maybe that some residents might feel that the technologies are being imposed on them. Now, that's not something that we're hearing from the residents themselves who are engaging in having this technology installed at the moment. But, you know, I suppose it could be seen that social housing is quite a quick win because it's easier to install, and those pathways with the view of sort of learning and developing the skills and the infrastructure. It's probably easier to do in some respects on social housing than it is to do perhaps on owner-occupied properties with the older population, because it is expensive technology to be fitted. So I'm going to hand back over to Kate, I think, who's going to talk about it from the new build perspective.
It's me, Deborah. It's Rachel. Thanks, Deborah.
Rachel.
Okay, so in terms of challenges with new build active homes, some of our case sites have experienced construction delays, which are not just the usual construction delays with new houses, but are due to the novel and complex nature of the new home energy systems. So for some of the developers, this is the first time they're developing low carbon homes, and they may also be working with different suppliers for the different low carbon technologies as well. So for example, there may be one engineer for solar panels, another to install the battery, and another to install a ground source heat pump. And this is in addition to the traditional sales that will be on site as well. And the tradespeople and new technology have to work together, which can be complicated. And these delays have obviously had a knock-on effect on the residents in terms of them experiencing uncertainty about when they would move and where they would live in the meantime as well. And related to this, there's been a phase of fault finding and fixing on some of the sites before and after the residents have moved in. Some of these faults have been found by the residents themselves and some by the developers and engineers. But within these new systems, realising there is a fault can be less obvious than with a traditional heating system. And sometimes faults are only found incidentally. And faults can create inefficiencies in the systems and can lead to higher than expected energy bills as well. Also, sometimes who's responsible for maintaining which part of the energy systems or who should be called when something goes wrong can be unclear. And it can be challenging for the residents to learn to use the new and sometimes complex technologies. And the technologies themselves may also require the residents to live in a different way in order to maximise the benefits of living in these kinds of homes. So some low carbon homes also provide lower thermal comfort levels than people are used to, but they do this over a more sustained period during the day rather than quickly heating up to a high temperature and then cooling right down to a lower temperature quickly. And the way that some low carbon heating systems and solar panels work mean that forward planning of energy use is also needed so that the homes heat up and cool down and energy is available when required so that you can use the solar energy generated when it's available or get the best feed-in tariff for it. And there are also issues around things like radiators may not become very warm. So despite the room feeling warm, you aren't able to dry your laundry on them, for example. And there's also issues around navigating the energy supply market to find the best energy supplier for these types of energy systems and the best tariff for a low carbon home. And this can be challenging for people to navigate. And some of our residents have had higher energy bills than they used to because they're not on the right tariff. And finally, in some of our case sites, the residents' energy supply and production are externally aggregated and managed. And on all the sites, the data associated with the smart technology is being accessed by third parties. So there are ethical issues around data sharing of what may seem to be innocuous home energy practices, but could give away potentially sensitive information about everyday routines and lifestyles. And with all these challenges, some residents may be able to more easily navigate them than others. And we need to make sure that this doesn't reproduce existing forms of social inequalities or produce new forms of inequalities. So facilitators are essential to avoid these potential inequalities. And my colleagues will now talk about these. And I think it's Deborah again, is it?
Are we not going to Ellie?
Oh, is it Ellie? Sorry.
I have to say thank you to all for doing my job for me. I was expecting to have to do all this, but okay. So this third question then, this is about how we overcome the obstacles that you were all just talking about then. Yeah.
Well, before doing that today, I also talk about the challenges because, as I said earlier, around these focus group discussions with...
Please, Ellie, please do. Sorry, don't let me...
Yeah, okay. Well, just, to finish with the challenges, so the negative part, so then we can focus on the solutions. So with some more positive things. So as part of this focus group discussions with these industry experts, we discussed the challenges, so the main barriers to the popularization of the active building concept. So it was an open-ended question, so it's not that I tried not to affect their answers. And I got 6 main barriers from them. So the first 2, they were related to technologies, and I think they've already mentioned them. So the first one is about the cost of the technologies, but it is worth noting that only a couple of them refer to the expensive technologies as a barrier to the popularization of active buildings, and they both said that technologies are actually expected to become cheaper over time because of the increase in demand. So it is, you know how the market works. If there's a greater demand, then the prices will drop. So they didn't think the cost of technologies as one of the main barriers. And then the other one, it is related to data control. As Deb said, that there's still some reticence with sharing data. And of course, we do need data in order to make sure active buildings perform in the optimal way and in the way we actually design them. But of course, in order to do that, we need to access data, and we need to manage them. So we do need some permission from the occupants. It is not possible that we just hack into their Wi-Fi and use the data, of course. And then, well, the rest of the answers I received, they were not related to technology, so I will just briefly mention them. And it is quite interesting, actually, that people who have an experience in this field, they did not focus on technologies, but they said that there are other aspects that they are related to skills shortage. So they believe that because all these concepts like low energy, low carbon, net zero, net energy, active, so all these concepts, they are new. So there's still some lack of experience in delivering these concepts, which means that there is a gap in terms of the skills, and they both refer to labor shortage, but also to shortage in terms of professionals with the knowledge and experience to deliver well-performing buildings, which means that there may be a risk added to the proposals and the submissions from contractors about hitting the target or not. Another barrier was related to the lack of combined authorities. So they told me that there's still a lack of local connectivity in terms of both thinking and acting, which affects decision making. So, for example, contractors, they do not, since they are not forced to opt for a greener solution, then they won't do it because it is more expensive. Another obstacle was the lack of evidence. Again, as I said, because these are all new concepts, sometimes there is a lack of evidence of the real world benefits from adopting the active building concept, which can be a problem for them because as architects or engineers, they have to liaise with the client and demonstrate the benefits. So they said that it would be important to build a database of evidence which shows that the actual buildings reflect the expected performance, because it is a business case for them. They need to see that if they are going to invest a higher amount of money, then they will be able to take it back in, let's say, a few years later. And then, so for them, the most important barrier is actually our culture, or let's say our cultural mindset, because they say that our mindset is what affects customer demand. So this is what it actually drives the market. So they only refer to the importance of embedding sustainability in our culture, in our mindset. So we can all do good things automatically in order to improve the energy and carbon performance of buildings, because this is not what happens now. And the reason is, based on what they told me, is that stimulating interest around sustainability can be a challenge because the carbon fluency of the general population is not there yet. And so that means that people have to be nudged into doing the right thing. So yeah, that's from me. And now we can move to the positive things.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much again, Ellie. Yeah. So the final theme that the panelists are going to address is exactly as I said, then how you can overcome all these obstacles. So, what can we do to make sure that this all important transition does actually take place, and that it does deliver the environmental and the societal benefits that we all hope and believe to be possible. So who's going to kick us off with that?
I will.
Okay, thank you very much, Deborah. Over to you.
No worries. So part of the work that we're doing at Swansea as part of our work package is we are looking at, as I said, older people and their experience of moving into having their homes retrofitted with low carbon technologies. But we're also working with the social landlords to see exactly what it is they're doing and how they're communicating with the tenants, as well as a documentary analysis of the tenant engagement materials. What we're learning from that is communication is vital when we're trying to facilitate that move towards encouraging people to engage with low carbon technologies, and that's communication from the outset to make sure that the tenant engagement materials are accessible and easy to read, not too technical, so not too much technical detail, and to use different modes of giving information. So some people have said they prefer to have that information given verbally, others want written materials, and some of the social landlords have done videos. So it's about making sure that there are different modes of information transmission to enable people to access it. And what we found is that older adults themselves want to be part of that decision-making process, so engaging them very early on when the sites were starting to talk about fitting these low carbon technologies. They had, it was pre-COVID, they had engagement events where they could talk through what was going to happen and how they were going to change the houses. And one or two of the local authorities or social landlords have even had sort of demonstrator homes, so people can see what the potential is and how their home will be adapted. And I think that is vital if we're going to encourage people. I mean, most of us don't know what those low carbon technologies would look like or how they would fit into our homes. So I think having a demonstrator building so you can see exactly what's going to be done, and even being walked through the process in your own property, and saying, you know, the heat pump, we'd like to put the heat pump here, are you going to be happy to have it there? I think these small things can make a big difference, even if the choice is quite limited as to where some of the technologies can go. It's about giving older people the agency to say whether they're going to be happy with that, or whether they want the whole raft of low carbon technologies in their home, or whether they just want to take it so far. And I think it's also important to share how the learnings with each other. So we've got sites where the residents themselves are sharing that information. So, if somebody's got a window open, it's like, oh, don't open your window in the summer because, the house will cool itself down. So I think that's quite important. It's giving them agency and enabling them to share that information between themselves and amongst themselves. And they then become ambassadors, I think, for the whole retrofit process. But in terms of the practicalities, I think it's also important to help, particularly older people, help them prepare their homes for their works. Things like emptying the lofts, moving furniture around that might be a little bit heavy. So it's about the practical aspects as well, and maybe some support to help them change their behaviour. So some social landlords have given people a guide. So, the best time to do your laundry is at this time of day when your energy costs will be cheaper. So it's there are lots of ways to encourage people, I think, to take this up, and when they start to see the benefits then in their bills, obviously it's gonna have multiple benefits for them in terms of their health, social and their financial well-being. So I don't know who's going next, whether it's Rachel again.
No, I'll go next this time. Throw you all off. Yeah, so sticking to the same question really that Deb has answered, but just coming at it from the new build perspective, I guess. A lot of what Deb has said about the retrofit definitely applies to some of the perspectives from people moving into the new build properties. So things like having lots of different modes of communication, having accurate communication as well, and having the information that the residents need to be able to understand how the system works. So things like installation guides are not really helpful to people. What they need is, you know, step by step of how you turn the system on, and things like how, as Rachel said, how the houses work slightly differently. So with lots of our houses, if you wanted it to be warm at say 7 o'clock in the morning, you'd need to turn the heating on much earlier than you would with a traditional gas central heating house. So it's just making sure that people are kind of up to speed with those type of things. Another thing that we found with the new build properties is that people often need the information at different points in time. So what has kind of typically been done is that people are given lots of information about their new heating system, either verbally or in information packs. Sometimes once COVID allowed it, people were given walkthroughs of their homes and that type of thing. But because people are in the process of moving house, it's a really kind of stressful time anyway, and they've got lots of other things on their minds. And so they don't necessarily take in all the information. And until they've actually lived in the home and used the system for a while, they haven't got any idea of the type of questions they need to be asking as well. So one of our case sites has got a really good example where they have somebody in place who's with the residents before they move in to give them all this information, but then they're also there afterwards as well. So the residents can phone up with questions, or they can access them via an interactive app, that type of thing. So as they're realizing, oh, you know, when I'm adjusting the thermostat, nothing's happening to the radiators or that type of thing, they can ask the question, and instead of thinking there's something wrong with the system, there's somebody there just to explain, no, it's fine, everything's okay, you know, it is going to heat up, you've just got to give it a bit longer. And this is also something that's relevant for people who are concerned about leaving their heating on for a long time. So some people can be really worried that they're going to get really high energy bills because, unlike a gas central heating system, these houses, they do have to be on for longer periods of time throughout the day. So having somebody there, again, to reassure them that no, you know, it's not going to impact your bills, it's just working at a lower setting for a longer period. So please don't turn it off, don't be cold. That's really, really helpful to people. And I just wanted to say as well, building on Deb's point about the kind of the social networks and the community aspect, it's a very similar picture that's emerging with the people living in the new build homes, where in a way the novelty and newness of the homes and some of the questions that the residents have about it is almost encouraging them to speak to their neighbours and find out, oh, what do you do, and has this happened to you, and that type of thing, and share information. And lots of people who've been involved in these kind of social networks have really seen that as a positive aspect of moving to these developments. And yeah, and just, I know we're talking about kind of solutions, but just to kind of say there's lots of other positive aspects I think that people have found from moving into the developments. So there are, you know, some issues that can lead to kind of risks and vulnerabilities, but there's also some aspects that are really positive to people. So lots of the people we've spoken to are really happy with the kind of the design of the homes overall, the size of the homes, and the new developments that they're living within. So lots of our participants have got kind of physical health or mobility issues. Because accessibility has been built into the new designs, they're able now to get out and about by themselves, which has given them a bit more privacy and a bit more independence, and this has been really valuable to them. Other people have also spoken about how the indoor air quality of the homes has improved from other homes that they used to live in, perhaps damper homes and that type of thing. And this has been a benefit they have felt to them, and also perhaps members of their family that have respiratory issues and that type of thing. And for people as well who've kind of lived in poorer quality housing before, or with older energy systems, less efficient energy systems, people have talked to us about how they've always been really worried as winter's approaching. They get this feeling of dread, and they're thinking, oh, you know, how am I going to manage the bills this year and that type of thing, and they're going to have to go back to kind of being huddled up in one room with, you know, stereotypically, but with blankets and lots of layers and things. But moving to these homes now, lots of people are starting to feel more positive and to almost lose that anxiety that they used to have. So yeah, sorry. So there's solutions to be made. There's not more Deb said, but just to say there's also lots of positives about the homes as well. I'm not sure if Ellie had anything to add now. Sorry.
Well, just before, sorry, just to jump in there, just to be mindful of the fact that we were hoping to allow time for people to ask questions if they wanted to. We've got about 20 minutes left. So overall, so if Ellie would like to briefly add to that, and Rachel, obviously, who hasn't yet had a chance to, then please go ahead and do that. But yeah, just be aware we need to leave time for some questions.
Okay, I will be very brief then. So just thinking about the future and thinking about why to invest in active buildings. When I had this kind of conversation with